Welcome to everybody who's tuning in. My name is Filip Einarsson and I work as an equity analyst on Redeye's Life Science team. Today we are delighted to host a Capital Market Day of Acarix. And we have been following the company for several years, but it is not until now that it's evident that the company is on a clear path to a commercial breakthrough. So we're looking forward to hear more about the opportunities and challenges in order to conquer the US and EU market. I will leave the floor to the new CEO, Ms. Helene Ljungdahl. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Philip. We're delighted to be here. And for those of you who are joining live and also watching the recording, welcome to this Acarix Capital Market Day. The company is at a very interesting point in time now, and we are excited to be sharing with you what we're working on and what we will be doing going forward. We've put together, hopefully, a very interesting program. I will give you initially here an overview of the company. And then I'm very excited, actually, to be introducing Samuel Schmidt, who is an associate professor at Aalborg University, but he was one of the inventors of the CAD-score system. So it will be interesting to hear his view on the technology and what the vision was when the technology was first invented. And then we thought it would be interesting to also share some real-world impressions of CAD-score. So we actually have Professor Goethe from Germany who will speak a little bit about how he's using CAD-score. And he's been using it now for quite some time in the clinic in Germany, and it's become part of their routine practice. And then recently I met a patient in the US, and she was explaining her feeling and having just had a CAD-score test. And I asked her if she would record that for us and we could share it, and she did. So we want to share that with you. It's important that we talk about the US expansion. The US is an incredible opportunity for CAD-score. I've been working there now for a few months, and I can see the interest among the physicians. I've spoken to many cardiologists, internal medicine, and we want to share with you what we're planning and how we're going to go to market in the US. Finally, we'll have Christian Lindholm, who is our CFO, who will share the financials. And then I will also come back and talk about our outlook for 2024. And of course, at the end, we will, with Philip, do a Q&A. So as I mentioned, I joined the company in September as the head of the US. And I'm very proud to say that today we have a fully functioning subsidiary. We have an office in New York, we have product in the warehouse, and we're ready now to take orders. We also have appointed a leadership team, the first key positions in the leadership team, and we will announce that very shortly. I was also appointed the CEO here in January, and I can't tell you that how I'm so excited about now leading the company over this next period. But at the core of everything that we do, it is about helping those patients that feel chest pain. And I think you all know somebody who's experienced either acute chest pain or chronic chest pain. But it's our job now to try to help those to identify whether that chest pain is linked to cardiovascular disease or not. So when we talk about cardiovascular disease, it's very common. I'm sure either you have it or you know somebody in your family or your friends. So it's a very common condition. But chest pain is also common. And the struggle here clinically is to identify, is that chest pain linked to a heart disease or not? And interestingly, and I found this very surprising when I joined the company, that 9 out of 10 patients that are being assessed, going through stress tests, going through angiograms, CTs, at the end of that process, they do not have CAD. So even when I've been speaking to cardiologists in the US, they say my waiting rooms are full of these chest pain patients, but I end up assessing them and then they don't have coronary artery disease. So we have the solution. I think in a way we have the perfect solution. It's an AI-driven, very easy to use, as you can see on the picture here. The device is placed on the patient's chest. The exam takes about 10 minutes. The actual listening part takes about 3 minutes. And we can rule out patients that do not have CAD. So after that 3 minutes, you get a score. It's either 20 or below, which means you have low risk and you can be ruled out, or you have above 20. And then you should just continue. And we do that with 96% certainty, which is very impressive. That's on par with some of the more advanced technologies. We also have a clinical program with more than 8,000 patients. So we've had most of our clinical studies have been done here in Europe and in Denmark. But it's a very robust program, and it was the base for the CE marking in Europe, and then also the recent FDA de novo approval. And a de novo approval indicates that we are the only technology on the market in the US like this. So it's a robust program, and we also have the technology backed by about 45 patents. The business model is quite simple. It's like a razor blade model, where you have a device that's either purchased or leased, and for each examination, you need to attach a personal patch. So, of course, we want the devices placed, but we also want to see a higher and increasing use of the patches over time. So where do we want the product to be used, or this technology? It's early in this pathway that I described. So if a patient presents to a doctor with stable chest pain, they would traditionally go to a stress test. A stress test can take about 45 minutes. A nuclear stress test can take 3 to 4 hours. So what we're suggesting and what we're communicating now in the US and also in Europe is that before going forward in this pathway, we do a CAD score. A quick CAD score, and it will rule out those that do not have coronary artery disease. Those patients that have more than 20, as I said, they will just continue. But we will free up space in that pathway, and we will also give peace of mind for the patients that have a score less than 20. So going into the US, we leaned a lot on our experience in Europe. And you can see that in the beginning, there was a slow start. It's hard to bring technology into the European market without reimbursement. And we are working today with the GBA, and we will be able to get to a point where we do have reimbursement in Germany. But in the meantime, we have a good strategy. And I think it's indicative because most of our sales right now is in Germany, but the sales are picking up. And importantly, the sales of the patches are also picking up. So 94% increase last year over the previous year, which is indicating that those that have CAD score systems, they're using them more and more. And like you'll hear from Dr. Goethe, he now says that the CAD score is part of their routine practice. We were fortunate enough to raise additional funding here at the end of last year, 80 million Swedish krona. 65% of that will go to support the launch in the US. The rest will go to our heart failure indication and then also to continue to grow our sales in Europe. So it's pointing in the right direction, and I'm looking forward now to see what happens when we start to have the sales in the US to add to this. We have a really strong team. That was one of the things that I realized when I came. You know, the technology is great, but the team is also great, and we have a great potential. But we sit around the table and we draw on experiences from pharmaceutical industry, from medtech industry, from the technology industry, from biotech, and even startups. So each of us have more than 15 years experience, and then we also have a very supportive board that we work very closely with. So that's an overview of the company. And I would like now to hand over to Samuel Schmidt. And as I mentioned, he is one of the inventors. He knows this product better than anyone. He works very closely with us on a regular basis. And it gives me a pleasure to welcome you, Samuel.
Yes, thank you, Helen. I'm an associate professor at Aalborg University in biomedical engineering, and I also work with R&D and Acarix. I'm going to tell a little bit about what was the idea behind the CAD score. Actually, the idea is from when I started in 2005 with one of my colleagues, Klaus Graf, and examining if we could actually detect coronary artery disease using an advanced audio device. So coronary artery disease is a disease where you have a big buildup of plaque in your coronary arteries. The coronary arteries is what you see on the image, the small arteries on the outside of the heart that actually supplies blood to the heart. And of course, diseases in these might be fatal. If you have a buildup of plaque, as you see in the lower image, you will have an obstruction of the flow, and that can lead to turbulence in the blood flow. This turbulence makes a small and weak noise, actually like you have swirling waters. And if you go into an old house where the pipes is calcified, you can hear water running in. It's the same here. In addition to that, when you have coronary artery disease, the relaxation of the heart is affected because the heart becomes stiffer, and you have a change in relaxation patterns after the heart has pumped blood out into the body. It relaxes in a different way. And all these sounds are actually too weak to hear, most of them for a human. But the idea is here, if we do signal processing to get rid of all the noise, and if we put machine learning on top of that, we can actually detect if you have coronary artery disease or not. So I'll talk a little bit about the device. The CAD-score device is a very, very sensitive audio device, and we power it with machine learning algorithms. We have a microphone that's a world-class microphone that's developed specifically to listen to the heart, and it's placed just on the chest of the patient. On top of that, we have an additional microphone, which is actually recording the room noise, the ambient noise we call it. That's the room in the noise in the room. So we can cancel this out from the heart sound recording. It's very much like the headphone sets that you know from when you're flying, that you can cancel out noise. We use the same technology. We have a touch screen where we can start recordings, and we have embedded our signal processing and machine learning algorithms into the device. An important aspect of the device is also the pads that keeps the device on the chest of the patient. But most importantly, it ensures that the microphone is fixed in a very specific way to the chest, so we have very good recordings of quality heart sounds, audio files. So we have very good and very low noise levels there. In all, it ends up in a CAD score, where if you have a CAD score below or equal to 20, we say we have low risk of CAD, and above you have an elevated risk of CAD. So how is a CAD score algorithm actually working? How can you have a heart sound recording and actually tell if you have coronary artery disease? So we'll look a little bit into how the algorithm is working. What you see in the top is a recording of the heart sound. You have 2 sounds for each heartbeat, and this is a 5-second recording. We of course uses a longer period. The first thing we have to do is that we have to segment the heart sound into individual beats. So we find out, extract each beat, and as you can see in the lower corner, we have the heart sounds aligned, and thereby we can analyze all of them in once. Then we do noise cancellation to ensure that we can extract, so we have as low noise as possible. If there's something going on in the room, we can subtract that, but also other noises from the body. When we have done that, we do extract features, and features is measures of the sound. That's mathematical measures. How is the sound sounding? It could be, is the sound a light tone, a pitch, high frequency sound, or low frequency sound? We quantify this with 8 different features which characterize the sound. So when we have these features all together, and all of them describe something in the sound that can be an indication of coronary artery disease, we combine them with a classifier into an acoustic score. So we take all these together with a machine learning algorithm into one score, which we call an acoustic score. Then we know that sex, for instance, males has a higher risk of coronary artery disease. We know that age, the older you get, the more risk you have, and hypertension is also a risk factor. We combine these together with our acoustic score into the final CAD score, where we have, again, below or equal to 20 is low risk, and above is elevated risk. But the question is, why are we actually so focused on classifying people as low risk? And that's because that we have a need for rule out in the clinics. That's what we believe in Acarix, that the current healthcare system is testing too many healthy patients. As Helen talked about, the current technologies are rather advanced scanning technologies. One of the common ones is cardiac CT. You see on the image there, get into a scanner and you get a good 3D image of your heart. We have other modalities also, but they are all costly, and they require specialized equipment and trained personnel at the hospital. And the problem here is that 90 to 95% of people undergoing these non-invasive tests does not solve coronary artery disease in the end. And that's where I believe that Acarix has a role to play, because we have in multiple studies shown that the Acarix CAD score can rule out these patients referred for non-invasive testing, And at least a third of them, we can rule them out very safely and say you do not have coronary artery disease, and thereby reducing the number of non-invasive testing needed. Why can I say that? With certainty, because Acarix has a very good tradition of science and publication of studies. And we have published studies with nearly 3,000 patients in total, demonstrating the value of the CAD score. And we have ongoing studies with nearly 4,000 patients enrolled in the current time, which is going to be fair. So why is all this important for us? First of all, if you're targeting a medical community and you have to change the whole way stuff is done, you have to have demonstration and scientific publication demonstrating this. But on top of this, the advantage of being a machine learning company and using advanced algorithms is the more data you get, the better you can do your algorithm. So when we are doing studies, it's not only to validate our methods, but it's also to collect new data so we can improve the CAD score system. So that wraps up what I'll present here, and back to you, Helen. Thank you.
Thank you, Samuel. And I wanted to pause on this slide for a moment, because when I speak to clinicians in the US now, the first question they ask is, what kind of data do you have? And then when we show the published data and the studies that we have done, it's quite impressive. So thank you for all that work, Samuel. So now the clinical experience. I could have stood here and told you about some of the reactions we've had, but we actually thought it would be better for you to hear a video. So the first video is from Professor Goethe in Germany. And as I mentioned earlier, he has been using CAD score now for a year and a half or so. And he sees the clinical value, and it has become part of their routine practice at this large hospital, where he's in charge of cardiology and also working in internal medicine. So I think we should look at that video.
I'm Andreas Goethe. I'm professor of medicine and chief of the Department of Cardiology and Intensive Care Medicine at the St. Vincent's Hospital in Paderborn in Germany. We do have about 8,000 in-house patients a year. So we are a whole group of cardiologists encompassing 16 physicians who actually work in this field, plus residents and fellows. So we cover all different cardiology technologies and techniques. And of course, to treat patients with coronary artery disease is one of our cornerstones of in-house patient therapy. So usually we do have to have a very short time period to do all diagnostic tests. And we do know from the latest guidelines that a treadmill test is not appropriate for ischemic assessment. So for this reason, of course, we do need imaging technologies like CT or echo or MRI, which are not unique available in this large volume of patients. So for this reason, I think it's very nice to have a new technology to actually get rid of patients who do not have coronary artery disease. And for this reason, I think the CAD score system doing a non-invasive technology is very helpful to rule out the presence of sclerosis of the coronary arteries in patients who come in with atypical angina pectoris or just chest pain, where you need to rule out that something is wrong on the coronary arteries. Well, I think the CAD score system is very useful, in particular in patients with a low risk profile, where you do have a low risk for coronary artery disease. So in patients with already established coronary artery disease or elderly patients with a long list of concomitant diseases, the discrimination with the CAD score might not be so good to use it in a clinical routine. However, if you have a young patient with a low risk profile for coronary artery disease, I think the system is extremely helpful to rule out with a high percentage that there is no pathology on the coronary arteries. And this is the main cohort of patients where we actually use the CAD score system routinely. It's very easy to use. You just need 4 times 8 seconds of non-breathing, and you can assess the flow in the coronary arteries. So I think it's very helpful to be used in patients where you want to rule out the presence of coronary artery disease or coronary artery sclerosis. You need to have easy technologies which are very helpful to demonstrate that the disease is present or to rule out.
So great. That gives you an example of somebody who's been using CLAD-score in the clinic. And as we're now increasing the discussions in the US, we're leaning on some of these experiences in Europe. But I think it would be interesting to also hear from a patient. That's from a clinical perspective. But what does it mean for a patient? A patient who has had chest pain, anxious about going to the doctor, and what happens when she then has a CAD score. So I think we should listen to what Kelly has to say.
Hi, my name is Kelly Kolodny, and I was having some heart pain, and it like this tightness feeling around my chest for the last several weeks. And at night, sometimes it would get really bad. And my husband, who is not an alarmist, said, you know what, I think we better go to the ER and see what's going on. This keeps happening. Well, not long after that, I had an opportunity to get a CAD system test. And when that was done, it was such an easy and simple procedure. It took no more than maybe 10 to 15 minutes. And I got my CAD score, and it was a 13. And it just gave me this sense of peace and relief that it wasn't my heart, I wasn't having a heart attack. I didn't have blocked arteries or something. It was probably just stress or something else that I'm not aware of, but it wasn't anything serious. And I was so grateful that I was able to do that without having to go through, a multiple of different kinds of expensive tests to come to the same conclusion. So it was just amazing.
So that was Kelly, and I think you get a sense now of the potential impact. So recognizing that Kelly lives in the United States, I thought it would be appropriate then to go on to talk about our plans for the US. I want to show you externally the world in the US, the healthcare world is changing. There's increasing demand for value-based healthcare. They are really aiming to drive down the cost. It's the most expensive healthcare system in the world. And recently, the new chest pain guidelines that were issued by American Heart and the American College of Cardiology, the two groups together, issued new chest pain guidelines focused on acute and chronic care. But you can see in those guidelines that they're striving to reduce the number of these tests being done. And interestingly, there used to be, it's called a pre-test probability. It's a clinical judgment whether the patient has coronary artery disease or not. That used to be 5%. They've raised that to 15%. And I know I've talked about this before. In the US healthcare system, if a patient comes in, they expect a clinical answer, and the doctor wants to give a clinical answer. So there are cardiologists who have said to me now that what do we do with these guidelines? And I think with CAD score, you can bring these together. So if you have a question mark whether the patient should proceed or not, you could do a CAD score. And that takes 10 minutes and you would have the answer. And on the graph here, we could be ruling out in the US 5.5 million patients. And you can run the numbers and you can see what financial impact that could have. We have an independent study that was done in the UK where they actually showed that if we implemented CAD score, they would do in the UK, they would have a saving of about 92 million pounds. So it's significant, the potential savings. But then internally, the way we are going to market, we had to be careful about this country. It's huge, and many states, and they're all very different. So what we decided to do was to go with a commercial partner for something we call a limited market release, and we're coming to the end of that now. But this was really testing our value proposition. It was testing with physicians, our strategy, and if we're going in the right direction. And the validation is there. We have some tweaks to do, but there was nothing major. So we're now ready to go to the next phase. We're expanding. So I mentioned it already, we're building our internal organization. I will announce the first 3 positions in the management team. We'll start building our own sales force, but we're also expanding commercial partners. So we're in a discussion right now with a number of them. And I think in an ideal situation in the US, you have certain regions, the Southeast, the Northeast, etc. So we're looking at the country that way. But you can see on the bottom the timeline of sort of major milestones. And I think I've talked about most of them, but I wanted to touch in particular on the CPT3 code. This means that in October, we were given approval for reimbursement, and it was endorsed by the American College of Cardiology without any remarks, and it was published in January, and it will be available to physicians in July. In the meantime, there are generic codes that physicians can use when they bill for reimbursement from the insurance companies, and we've done that. And it's coming back in the kind of amount that we were expecting, or were hoping for, I should say. So that's also a strong indication. And then we last week signed an agreement with a large clinic in New Jersey that has 5 separate units, lots of patients, and they now want to start using CADScor and working it into their practice. So the timeline is moving, and then the next time we present, we hopefully will give you a lot more information on what's happening from now on. I also want to talk a little bit about heart failure. I know there's been a lot of questions around this. We want to expand our portfolio. And this is another project that Samuel and the R&D team have been working on. Heart failure is also affecting a lot of people, but the difficulty in heart failure is more finding the patients early. And we have data to support. Now we made a filing, an application for a breakthrough therapy with the FDA. And that went in, and we're waiting for a response from the FDA, which should be coming here in early April. And this is just standard process. We'll get the questions, and then we'll gauge if we get the breakthrough designation or not. If we do, that means that we will move relatively quickly through the approval process. And then we would have 2 products to be working with. So that wraps up the US for now. And I would like to hand over to Christian, our CFO, who will walk through some of the numbers, and then I'll come back and talk about our 2024 projections. So Christian, over to you.
Thank you, Helen, and welcome everyone to the financial part of this presentation. So I will start up with some key metrics from our income statement. And on an annual basis, we increased revenues by 73%. And we ended up in 3,760,000 Swedish crowns. And we also report an increase in gross margin from 73% to 75% for the year. If we look into the split of revenues, 43% of the total revenues come from the CADScor system, which also generated a gross margin of 54%. Patches represent 57% of the revenues and a margin about 91%. So looking into our operating expenses, they amounted to 54.5 million and increased by 27% over the year. And the cost increase is mainly related to the 2 last quarters and mainly due to the entry into the US market. From the ongoing sales, we can see that the majority of the revenues is recognized in Germany, and you can see that on this slide. EBIT amounts to a loss of 51.7 million compared to a loss of 41.4 million previous year. Number of CADScor systems sold amounts to 57 compared to 51 previous year, and ongoing customer evaluations amounted to 12 when we closed the year. And of course, we expect a positive outcome from those during the first quarter this year. Finally, we can report a 94% increase in patch sales, and gradually we can see an increase in the repurchase rate, which is a very important key metric for us. So 55% of the patches sold was ordered from existing customers. Okay, and then if we have a look into the financial position and the cash flow, as you can see, the total assets increased during the year from 90 million to 119 million. And that's mainly due to our ongoing rights issue at the turn of the year. The company's cash position amounted to 16 million compared to 64 million previous year. So our rights issue provided the company with a net of 69 million during the first quarter, during this current quarter. The cash position as of December, including the proceeds from the rights issue, will finance the operation up to the first quarter 2023. Looking at the cash flow, so the cash flow outflow for the year amounted to 48 million. Previous year was the outflow about 37 million after adjustment of the rights issue. Okay, and my last slide will show you the investor relation, the holdings of Acarix as of January 31. So these slides present ownership structure, and it's the end of January. So our largest owner is a pension fund, and they have a position that holds 90% ownership. Looking into our 10 largest owners, they represent just under 25%. If we look isolated to January, we received 537 new shareholders and 182 sold their holdings. So in total, we have about 5,500 shareholders, and 85% are actually based in Sweden, and they represent 73% of votes in capital in Acarix. If we look back in time, let's say 1 year back, the number of shareholders has been fluctuated around 5,000. And today, as of today, as it looks now, we have a market cap of approximately 180 million Swedish crowns then. So that was it, Helen. Then I hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. So when we look forward to the future, we did announce last year that our goal is to reach 3,000 installed CADScor system by the end of 2024, with a revenue of 200 million Swedish and a gross margin over 80%. So some might question, how did you arrive at these numbers? And these numbers really have arrived under the assumption that we will be successful in the US. And about 65% of this is coming from the US. And in the US, we will be based in clinics, in hospitals, but also in integrated delivery networks, IDNs. And we've even had some early discussions with the VA, the Veterans Administrations. So if you take into those 4 different potential channels, I feel quite confident that we're going to hit these numbers. And the plans that we're going to putting in place, and as sort of this is indicating this graph, is that we're now at an inflection point. We have everything we need now to really succeed in the US, but we should also not forget about the EU. We have a good strategy in Germany, we have a good strategy in the UK, and we'll continue to look at other markets that has a CE marking. The reimbursement will continue to be something we work closely on in Europe, in particular Germany and the UK. And then we want to expand our portfolio. We want to have more products like CADScor, with the potential of CADScor. So heart failure would be the next one. And then, of course, it's the team. So to summarize that, we have a really good product, we have a good team, and we have a really interesting opportunity in front of us. So if I could end this presentation with just a few words on why. Why should you engage? Why should you invest? It's rare that you have a product that is substantiated by this type of data and this type of clinical program for a startup. We have started to get traction in Europe. The US is a huge market, but we're going to approach it in a very systematic way. And then we have the team now in place that we will work with. And I'm actually really happy because as of yesterday, I was allowed myself to purchase shares. I haven't been able to do before. So yesterday I purchased 1 million shares. So I have an interest in making this happen now. And I would like to invite as many as possible to join me in this journey. So that concludes our presentation. And Philip, maybe we should go over to Q&A.
Okay, thanks a lot for an interesting presentation today. So I thought we could start looking at you released your year-end report yesterday, and you reported full year revenues, as you said, of 3.7 million SEK. And also you mentioned the 12 ongoing customer evaluations in the end of Q4. Could you add some context to these numbers? I mean, they are, as you said, with your 2024 goals, that there is an anticipated significant growth during this period. And as well, could you add some context to these customer evaluations? How many, for one customer evaluation, how many systems could that possibly translate to, if you could add any sort of context to this?
Yeah, Christian, I could talk a little bit to this. What we have realized with all our customers is that they need to use the product before they actually buy it. And that's what we call customer evaluations. The conversion rate on those is very high. So what the physician will do is run the tests, and then end up purchasing the device. Depends on the size of the clinic, if this is one device or not. But usually they will buy one device to start with, and then the patches follow as a revenue stream. If we think about the lifetime value as we look at it over 3 years, to us, one sold system is about 300,000 Swedish krona. So hopefully that answers your questions.
Okay, thank you. Another sort of ongoing question is that regarding the current component shortages that has been evident in many companies during the Q4 reports. Could you add some context? How does this look for you and Acarix?
Yeah. It's critical. How many components does our system have? There's a lot.
Yeah,
it's a lot of components, but we have, I did check with our manufacturing group, and we have enough components to meet our sales forecast for this year. And then we can see already that it's becoming more and more available. It's getting easier. So we think by the end of this year, we will hopefully be in a different situation, but we certainly have enough to meet the sales forecast for this year.
Okay, so you wouldn't say that you have any challenges looking forward?
Not at the moment, no.
Okay.
Not this year.
So I want to touch little bit on, you were touching upon your clinical validation of CADScor and your product. And how do you consider the current clinical validation for CADScor? Do you think it's sufficient for a broad market launch, or do you see any potential need of broadening it?
In terms of clinical data, potentially?
Yeah.
Yeah. So as we've talked about today, we have a very robust clinical program. It's unusual for the FDA to give approval based on European data. So that's very solid. We have a randomized control trial ongoing at the moment that's being recruited. That's an important addition. But I feel that in terms of going to the market, we have enough. There's questions, though, I have to say, from these larger networks I was talking about, the IDNs, saying that if we introduce CADScor across this network, will physicians stop using the other tests? And that's a real-world data or a clinical utility study. So that's what we're contemplating in the US. We might have to do that to actually see what happens in the clinic with the practical use.
Okay, interesting. Thanks. So you touched a little bit on IDNs now, so I think it could be feasible for me to go into my next question, which actually touches upon that. And as you mentioned, you have been into sort of contact with IDNs, and I'm interested in how could the structure of sort of a partnership with an IDN look in sort of the structural perspective? What could we expect?
Yeah, so an IDN is almost like a healthcare system in Europe. It's intact, and it will take a patient from sort of end to end. There's about 1,000 of these now in the US, and they look for efficiencies and streamlining. And there's many of them. Now, if we go in to an IDN, we have to get approval by a value-added committee, and that's at a top level. So they could say, yes, we want CADScor executed throughout this network, But it won't work unless the clinicians at the bottom have bought in. So when you go to drive success at an IDM, we have to work at 2 levels. We need to get the approval at the top, and we need to establish the clinical need. And if they meet, then you have a big impact.
Yeah, and if I recall correctly, I read in a quarterly report of yours that there has been discussions ongoing with one of these IDNs.
Yes. There's actually a few more now. They're becoming more interested.
Okay, interesting. Could you give some sort of context to this as well? Maybe what can you say?
Yeah, so some of these are, like I said, large networks, and we have been talking on both levels. We've had some clinicians that said you really need to be talking at the top. And when we talk to the ones at the top, if I may say that, then they say you need to establish the need. I can't name today which institutions these are, but they are interested because also of the cost savings that we saw from the UK paper. I might say a few words about the Veterans Administration, which it has about hundreds of hospitals across the US. They're inundated with these patients, but they also have thousands of outpatient clinics that feed into the hospital. And in some of the discussions we've had there, they say, this product is really, this technology is really supposed to be out there so that we can streamline who comes into the hospitals for further assessment. So now we're talking these big systems, and there's a lot of potential there, but we're just starting. So we will continue to build on that.
I understand. Interesting. Thanks. Yeah. So also you touched a little bit upon this as well, but the American Heart Association has published new guidelines regarding patients with chest pains. Could you elaborate a little bit on these and sort of the direct meaning of these for Acarix approaching in the US?
Yeah, I think when I was looking at the timeline, first we had the FDA approval, then we have the reimbursement code, the CPT code has been approved. And then you get guidelines that actually opens a door. The guidelines don't include CAD score because they don't know about CAD score. But they do say that if the patient has less than 15% pre-test probability, the physician should do nothing. So that's where we can bring in CAD score. And we're going to see how that could be done in an appropriate way.
Okay.
But if you think about it, approval, reimbursement, and guidelines that open a door, that's a good place to be.
Yes. So if we look a little bit on the Acarix SEISMO, I mean, you have an ongoing study right now, and how do you see that it could be integrated into your established channels and the channels you are going to establish here moving forward as a potential launched product?
Yeah, and it's a bit early to speak about the details of that launch, but I think at this time we have CAD score, and we'll have a product for heart failure. It's going to be up to us to decide how do we want to put it. Do we want to put it together? Do we want to do something different? But it's a little bit early right now to decide, to describe what we will do.
Okay. And also a little bit of a question regarding the software in CAD score. How do you look at sort of a software update? How would that take place? I mean, with the units being out in the hospitals, etc. How would that work?
Yeah.
Yes. For now, you can update it, but you have to do it on site. So you go out and put a memory card in the device, and it updates automatically. In future versions, there might be able to have more online updates. Yeah. So but for now, it has to be done manually. Yeah. Okay. But it's possible, and we have done that several times. Yeah.
I understand that, and so your ambition in the long term is sort of try to make it more available from digitally, so to say.
Yeah, that could be an option. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And regarding a recent press release was that you applied for breakthrough therapy to the FDA with heart failure. And what kind of response is it that you expect from the FDA here in April?
So the file, we actually put in an application for a breakthrough designation.
Yep.
And we expect to hear back from the FDA in early April. And then we will know if we're going in that direction or not. But as it goes on from there, it's too early. So we just filed the application.
Yes, and can you leave a comment on this choice of sort of the initial regulatory path? I mean, the breakthrough.
It gives you an opportunity to go faster to the market.
Okay, and you think that the currently available data that you have supports this approach?
That's what we need to see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. So there's been actually a few questions coming in as well from the audience. I think we should touch upon them as well.
Yep.
And I'll start by asking, have you considered giving your systems away for free to certain hospitals in order to make doctors aware and familiar with your systems and increase the recurring revenue through more patches sold?
So it's hard, right? Because it's such a valuable technology. But there are situations where we might lend them a system for a certain period. But then they tend, and it's an evaluation, and then they tend to purchase. But we have to see in the future if there's certain areas that maybe we need to think about this.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You said sales are picking up. Is this in Q1 and in the US? Because in the fourth quarter of 2021, you sold 11 systems compared to the 22 systems in Q4 2020. So I guess this question is more related to what are your expectations now for like the first half of 2022 in that regard?
So I can say a few words and then Christian, I can pass on to you. But it's important to recognize that we have these 12 ongoing evaluations in Germany. So the timing of those were not ideal. So hopefully they will transition. In the US, I cannot tell you how hard we're working to get those first units sold, but we're getting through our evaluations in the US as well. So I hope to be able to communicate shortly on that. And Christian, do you want to add to that?
I think that's pretty much the explanation. And I mean, we are really monitoring monthly and weekly the sales progress that we are doing in the different markets, and US is extremely important for us moving forward. So, yeah.
All right, so moving on. Getting to 3,000 installed devices in 2024, you need to ramp up dramatically. So can you give some more insight into your sourcing, potential bottlenecks, etc.?
Yes, so you're absolutely right. And we have to, as a company, structure ourselves appropriately to meet that demand. And we've said to ourselves that we need to be on top of this so that as we start growing in the US, we're prepared. But it's something that's high on our management agenda and something we're building. And I think the transformation plan inside manufacturing is going to be critical.
Okay.
Yeah.
So with 3,000 devices in operation and your 300,000 SEK in patch revenue over 3 years, you get to 300 million SEK patch revenues in 2025. Is the calculation okay, or should the investors tilt to higher patch revenues in year 3? So this is sort of a speculative question, I guess you could ask, but could you add some sort of context here?
I think I would have to ask Christian to answer this if you have an answer to that.
We have of course calculated this backwards, and as it looks now, we will have a different price level in US compared to Europe. Based on the price level that we have estimated and assessed, we will reach those targets.
Okay. And I want to highlight again that for the viewers that there's still a possibility to ask questions if you have anything you want to ask to the Acarix team here. Moving on, can you elaborate on the seismo/heart failure opportunity? How will it fit with the current systems? Is it a different patch on the same system or new? An indicative timeline beyond the BTD response?
So these are difficult questions because we're in such early stages.
Yes.
Yeah, and I don't think we have that answers at this time. But we're working through it, and we will have the answer when, in time for the launch. We will be well prepared for that approval when it comes.
Yes, I understand. It seems to be
a lot of interest in heart failure.
Yes. Indeed. So I thought we could be sort of, while we wait for maybe more response from the audience, we could go for a sort of a broad question here, and that is that the restrictions, of course, are easing up around the world, and of course, the US being a significant market for you moving forward. And I know that previously there has been a negative damage from the restrictions and with the travel restrictions, and it's been difficult to get into the hospitals and the sales process, etc. Could you give us some sort of insight in how do you view this playing out from now with the easing up of the restrictions and less overall restrictions?
Yeah. So the restrictions are definitely easing up, but also within the healthcare world, the whole new technology landscape has changed. So we do a lot of Teams and Zoom meetings. Even when I'm here, we're doing meetings in the US. So you could see that access has changed over time, but it is definitely easing up in the US. In Germany, we actually have been able to get access through the good network that our sales organization, we have 4 sales leaders down there, and they are working through their networks and their contacts. So we have had good contact there, but it's when it's a new contact, it can be difficult sometimes.
Yeah, I understand. So would you say that you've had sort of a positive impact so far, so to say? It's of course a short time period, but
yes.
you can...
I actually haven't really noticed it in the US now. If you wear your mask, you can get in. So, yeah.
Okay, that's positive. Yeah. So we have a few more questions here coming in. Let's see what they say. The current cash position is enough for first quarter of 2023. How do you see on that?
I'm going to turn it to you, Christian.
Yes, I mean, this is according to our plan. When we raised and we planned the rights issue for previous year, 2021, the aim was to cover the next coming 12 months. And we, together with Redeye, did a successful rights issue, and nothing that we have communicated have changed. We will manage the 12 coming months, and of course there will be a new discussion regarding financing end of this year.
Okay, thank you. And so. How is the GBA process going? Could you add any sort of insight to the current prospects?
Any reimbursement process is long and drawn out. So I could say is that it's following the plan. It's moving forward. And in the meantime, what we've discussed with the German team is that we need to have a really good strategy while we're waiting, if I may call it that, for their decision. So I feel that we have a good strategy in Germany now to go forward. But the process is running its course, and we are part of that process.
Yeah. I understand. So sort of wrapping up here, I'm going to go for one last question, and it's something we touched upon a little bit earlier, but maybe you could add some last comments on this. And it's, again, elaborate on how the installed base of 3,000 units builds up in 2022 and 2023. Just if you have any sort of comment you could bring to the investors here.
I don't know if we can comment on individual years.
Yeah.
But we have a plan for hitting that 3,000 in 2024.
All right. I think that's the questions we had for today. So thanks a lot for your presentation of Acarix. And I want to wish you good luck with the launch here going forward.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks to Redeye for hosting us.
Yeah.
Thanks.